To disrupt poverty, criminalization, and family separation. Welcome, welcome. We just let folks into the room, and it's good to see y'all today for this last installment in a five-part series of Breaking Silos in Reproductive Justice. And I will pass it to Ron and Karen for Spanish interpretation.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, everyone. My name is Ron, and I'm here with Karin, my co-interpreter, and we're with Tilde Language Access Cooperative. Buenas tardes, yo soy Ron y estoy aquí con mi co-intérprete Karin y somos de la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Tilde. This webinar will be in English and we'll be providing simultaneous interpreting into Spanish using the interpretation function in Zoom. So we'll be given more detailed instructions in Spanish for people who would like to join a language channel and follow along in Spanish. People who would like to speak up in Spanish can or participate can do so via the chat or the Q&A function. Buenas tardes. Si desean escuchar la interpretación hacia el español, pueden seleccionar un canal de idioma. Lo van a hacer mirando las instrucciones en su pantalla. Si están conectados vía su computadora, van a seleccionar el globo que dice interpretación y luego seleccionan español para poder escuchar la interpretación. Si están conectados con su teléfono inteligente o celular, van a hacer clic en los tres puntos que dicen más, luego seleccionan interpretación de idiomas y por último seleccionan español. Si usted es bilingüe, no necesita conectarse con el canal de idioma. Tiene la opción de hacerlo, pero no hace falta, solamente si desea escuchar la interpretación al español. Just a reminder for speakers to speak at a moderate pace so that we can do a good job interpreting. Un recordatorio final a los panelistas que hablen a un paso moderado para que podamos hacer un buen trabajo interpretando. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate that. So today our conversation is webinar style. So that means that only the speakers will have video and mic access, but we would love for everybody to be as interactive as possible by sharing your thoughts, any feelings, and things that might resonate in the chat. You can also use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we'll circle back to the Q&A at the end. Additionally, to foster a space where folks feel as comfortable as possible, sharing and engaging, we will deny any otters and AI transcription tools. If you are kicked out, please rejoin the webinar on a non-otter AI account. Closed captioning is available. You can access that by clicking the three dots under More and selecting closed captioning. If there's anything that you need during the webinar, please feel free to direct message Miriam Mack or M. Lawler. And we also have a play space. So it's a parallel space that we've incorporated throughout this entire series, where you're able to process, ask questions, color, and tap into the learnings, insights, and resources in this session. So please engage in the play space. It's really an awesome place to be in to share your thoughts in real time. And yeah, so moving on to that, we're ready to dig into this conversation. We're so excited to have y'all here with us today and for the panel that we've been able to pull together. This teaching is the final session in our five-part series, Breaking Silos in Reproductive Justice. And with this series, we're building off of a symposium that we convened last November. And we designed the series to really uplift the ways people are already practicing family policing abolition and to deepen our shared understanding of how this work is bound up in the broader reproductive justice movement. And my name is Jasmine Sankofa. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Executive Director of Movement for Family Power. I will be moderating today's conversation. And it is my absolute honor to introduce you to our panelists today. We have a rock star group of folks on the call. And I'll start off by introducing Kiara M. Bridges, who is a professor of law at UC Berkeley School of Law and the author of 3 books, Reproducing Race and Ethnography of Pregnancy as a Site of Racialization, the Poverty of Privacy Rights, and Critical Race Theory, a Primer. Next, we have Imani Worthy, who is the founder and executive director of Black Families Love and Unite, or Blue for short. We have Margaret Prescott, who is the co-founder of Black Women for Wages for Housework and serves as a coordinator of women of color in the Global Women's Strike and joint coordinator of the Care Income Now campaign and Give Us Back Our Children. Next up, we have Rena Karifa Johnson, who is an attorney, an organizer, and campaigner dedicated to dismantling systems of state violence and white supremacy. And last but not least, we have Zara Raven, who is a mad Caribbean queer mama, a wellness practitioner, and organizer with the Philly Child Care Collective, working to build networks of care for children and their caregivers. And if you're in that play space, or if you want to hop into that play space now, you're able to see their full bios. So check it out. They're awesome and amazing folks, and we're hoping that you get even more familiar with their work from this conversation. And now we'll jump right on into it. I'm really excited. But obviously we know with this conversation, what we really wanted to ground in, and I think it's important to note, right? This whole series was about breaking silos in the reproductive justice movement, recognizing that reproductive justice isn't about simply our access to abortion care and our decision making around our bodies as it relates to accessing abortion care, right? Reproductive justice is a broader framework around bodily autonomy, and it includes our right to raise children in safe and sustainable communities. It includes our right to thrive as human beings in our full authenticity and our full realities. But we know that there's constant threats by the government to completely rid us of that bodily autonomy, right? To try and make us feel powerless. And so even thinking about that most recently with the so-called Big Beautiful Bill and the impact on families. So I'm wondering if we can have some of our panelists first start talking about how this so-called Big Beautiful Bill impacts families, especially BIPOC and low-income families, and how do we see this dismantling of the limited social safety net that we had, right, function as part of the criminalization and family separation playbook. And maybe Kiara, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you so much. And I just want to just start off by thanking, I'm so honored to be here sharing this space with you all. I appreciate the invitation to join the conversation and to be in conversation with such brilliant folks. So I'm humbled and honored to be here. But just to begin to answer your question, we need to find another term for that bill because the term is propaganda. That's part of the discursive work of naming that bill. But as you completely accurately describe, the bill, the function of it is to dismantle the very miserly, stingy social safety net that the U.S. has managed to erect after the demands of folks to erect some form of social net. The bill is designed to dismantle it. And what my remarks are sort of coming in from like a 50,000 foot sort of perspective, that I just want to just underscore how the dismantling of the social safety net will lead to increased poverty in this country, and how that poverty, we manage poverty in the US through the carceral systems, right? And carceral systems are not just prisons and police and probation, but it's also the family regulation system. It's also the family dismantlement system, foster care system, so on. And I just want to share, just as a sort of theoretical background for the audience, a framework that I developed in my second book, Poverty of Privacy Rights. I called it the moral construction of poverty. And the moral construction of poverty is the idea, I call it that, but it's a longstanding idea that people are poor, people are low income, people need help from the state or from third parties, not because of structural forces, right? Not because the economy is such that there are low wage jobs and high wage jobs, and those middle skill, middle wage jobs have sort of evaporated over generations. You know, the idea is that people are poor not because of these sort of macro forces that have functioned to, you know, immiserate communities, but rather the idea of the moral construction of poverty is that people are poor because there's something wrong with them, right? Because they are lazy, because they are sexually promiscuous, because they had a baby out of wedlock, because they, you know, have addictive personality or substance use disorder, or they are just criminally inclined or lack a work ethic, right? So that's the moral construction of poverty. The idea that people are poor because there is something wrong with them, as opposed to something wrong with the society within which people exist. Um, the moral construction of poverty goes a long way towards legitimizing, responding to impoverished people, not with support, but rather with carcerality, rather with prisons and jails, and rather with the Family Regulation Center and its system. And just to focus on the latter, just a little bit more directly, think about it. If people are poor because there's something wrong with them, right? We're kind of uh, neglecting our duties if we allow those people to raise children, because children are going to be raised by people who have something wrong with them. So if people are poor because there's something wrong with them, right, the responsible thing to do is to remove those children from those parents who, by definition, have something wrong with them. And I want to just underscore that the moral construction of poverty is a popular idea in the US. The last time it was polled, something like 65% of Americans who responded said they agreed with the idea that if you work hard and save, like you too can be successful. And it's partisan in the sense that Republicans are more likely than Democrats to subscribe to the idea that of the moral construction of poverty. But it's also bipartisan that even Democrats, a majority of Democrats believe that there is something wrong with poor people. And so with this very popular, with this sort of American idea that if you're poor, then there's something, you know, you have some sort of moral deficiency. The dismantling of the social safety net that we see with the big, beautiful bill, whatever they want to call it, it will lead to carcerality. It will lead to more criminalization. It will lead to more incarceration, and it will lead to more dissolution of vulnerable families, families who just need support in late stage capitalism. It's all in my remarks there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for, mentioning that. I think, that connection and that through line, I think a lot of folks can circle back on throughout this conversation, right? With how these systems legitimize themselves, right? Through these pejorative stereotypes about folks. And Margaret, I'm wondering if you can jump in and share a little bit more how you're seeing it, especially that interrelationship between this bill and this complete defunding of families.
Right, thank you. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. Really looking forward to it. Very, very excited about it. And also for those of us who've been in the trenches for decades now on this, it's really good to see new faces, to see younger folks coming up, and this focus on child welfare in a much broader way than we had seen initially. I do want to say that actually what some of us call this bill is the big, brutal bill, right? And in relation to child welfare, I really want to thank and lift up the welfare warriors who sent and posted this information to us, because the big, brutal bill has now added $5,000 tax refund in addition to the 16,810 tax credit for adoption. Okay, so we see where that's going. Um, I think all of us know by now when we talk about the social safety net, we're talking about the cuts in food assistance, to the WIC program, Medicaid. I mean, just across housing, just across the board, it's devastating. And clearly, I mean, even the mainstream press are acknowledging that who gains from this big, brutal bill are the wealthy, and who loses in this big, brutal bill are those of us at the bottom. And we know that the majority of those, percentage-wise, percentage by population, obviously Black, Indigenous, Latinx, people of color, okay? Those of us who are at the bottom, and hitting single mothers, especially hard. I should say too that one thing that we have to underscore when we're talking about the big brutal bill are work requirements. Now that's really something we have to wrap our head around, okay? And the sister who spoke before me, Kiara, talked about the moral construction of poverty. And I really want to take us back a little bit to the case of the Negro family. I mean, that Moynihan bill in the 1960s that basically blamed Black single mothers in particular for the disintegration of the Black family. Okay. And you have all of these Black women sitting around doing nothing, right? Our children are totally out of control, because when you look at when the rebellions broke out across the United States, who were the ones who were out on the street doing that rebellion? It wasn't the children of quote unquote the Black middle class, because there is a kind of a class divide among Black folks too. It was the children of welfare mothers. It was the children, of mothers, impoverished mothers who were absolutely out there. So that whole trope of the welfare queen, the attack that continues today on welfare mothers really continues. And part of why I really want to mention too, because in a lot of ways they've gotten a pass on this. And what I mean by this is back in 1965, Johnny Tillman, a Black mother and grandmother out of Watts, California, said that if you paid homemakers for caring for their children, doing housework, what today we would call caregiving, the welfare problem would be solved. And she said that housewives would gain as well. So she was really crossing that divide then among those of us who are at the bottom on welfare and those who are full-time, quote unquote, homemakers, who may not be necessarily be those at the bottom. Now, the mainstream feminist movement never really picked that up. They never saw the tremendous work that the National Welfare Rights Organization was doing. And Johnny Tillman was one of their past presidents, great woman, along with Beulah Sanders and others. They were defining feminism or women's rights as the right to get a job outside the home. And that welfare rights movement, irrelevant, okay? Demanding direct cash. That's what they were doing. They were talking about a guaranteed adequate income. They were talking about direct cash, right, for us getting it. And we see more conversations now happening around direct cash. But I do think that people tend to shy away from that. We tend to have all of these other terms and whatnot that we're using about it. Well, at the end of the day, when we look at the data, we're seeing, I'm looking at this figure. I don't want to go on about this, but Lisa Sangoy and Dorothy Roberts actually popularized it, where from 1982 to 2003, federal funding for removing children from their homes increased 20,000%. Y'all hear me? 20,000%, from 25 million to $5 billion. Okay, that's our money. that we should be getting to be able to keep our families together rather than taking our children from us. And I think as a movement on child welfare, and we talk about dismantling the child welfare system, about family policing, etc., we must have central in that attacking poverty, in particular the poverty of single mothers, and demanding direct cash. We tend to demand everything else, but we're not going to demand direct cash. Meanwhile, they're taking the money and taking our children from us and laughing all the way to the bank. Finally, what I want to say about that is to put that whole because there's a lot of ways in which so much of the movement have accepted the state, the capitalist definition of work and who is a worker. And if we are not addressing that issue, we're going to be fighting work requirements from now till kingdom come, okay? Because we haven't established that principle all across movements. Because it's not like you have to drop what you're doing and pick up something else, but how is that relevant to keeping our children? How is that relevant to supporting single mothers? How is that relevant to recognizing the bond between mothers or primary caregiver and our children? And it's a problem in the United States, but it's also an international problem. And, I'm an immigrant from the Caribbean region. And years ago, when I was a young woman, I gave a speech that became a book called Black Women Bringing It All Back Home, in which we talked about the wealth that we're creating in the global South that makes the lifestyle for those of us living in the global North possible. All right. A lot of the work that goes on in the global South is unwaged, is unpaid. They're seen as productive. So any little cash or money or aid you get is seen as a charity. We're finished up with charity. We're creating all of the workers, we're creating the wealth, and we want our money back. And we're not going to be shy about saying that, including when it comes to child welfare and keeping our families together. So those of you, I'm sure a number of you are familiar with Moynihan's work, with what he did, and also his book, The Politics of a Guaranteed Income. The very first footnote on the very first page said that if we recognize homemaking, raising children, etc., as work, then welfare cannot be viewed as a charity. Even on that state level, he knew it. Okay, so I just want to end there and look some of that stuff up and look some of that history up of Johnny Tillman and Beulah Saunders and the National Welfare Rights Movement, because it very much relates to how we're making our demands, the language that we're using right now, and can be a tremendous strength and power for us as we're moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I really appreciate you grounding us in that history and that lineage, right? And calling by name our like movement ancestors and elders, right? Who have really been talking about this forever, right? I think oftentimes when we have these conversations, we're like the solutions aren't rocket science. Like I say that all the time, right? Like we know in the research, and Rena, I'll invite you to jump in here too, but like we know from the research that $1,000 spend on public benefits, we're going to see decreases in child abuse reports, a 7.7% decrease in child fatalities. Like we know that cash matters and getting cash in the hands of families makes a huge difference. But I think what you're pointing to is like, and what I think is so important about this conversation, right, is that this isn't just about common sense. This is a direct refusal, and these are policy choices, right? This isn't like we can't explain away about how important and how effective it is to resource families because they know it is, right? And these are deliberate choices that are made by the system, deliberate, to Kiara's point, deliberate framing and stereotyping and associations of folks who are living in poverty in order to do exactly what the system is doing. And so, Rena, I wanted to see if you wanted to just talk a little bit about Medicaid and what we're seeing about like these policies, and we know that this is going to increase poverty by responding in the way that the system is.
Thank you, Jasmine. It's both like a amazing dream and also a little bit of a nightmare to have to speak after people like Cara Bridges and Margaret Prescott, but I'm just very grateful to be in this conversation with you all right now. Yeah, I mean, I think what Professor Bridges spoke a lot about kind of the moral construction of poverty and this idea that if there's something wrong, people are poor because there's something wrong with them, then the way that we fix it is kind of carcerality and punishment. And I think that that really relates to what I wanted to speak to, which is like a lot of the way this mass like jump in criminalization is happening is under the auspice of a conversation about like public safety, right? What happens is there's a very clear strategy of pushing more people into the margins, pushing more people into poverty, pushing more people into suffering and desperation, and then whipping up a panic about how unsafe everybody is because of that. And in this country, when we talk about public safety, we're often given police, prisons, jails as a solution. To that problem. So I think when we look at the big brutal bill or whatever we want to call it or not call it, Satan's mandate, whatever works for every single person, it's very clearly doing that. So it's gutting Medicaid. When Medicaid was expanded through kind of uh, Obamacare expansion. In 3 years, there was a 32% in arrests. And a lot of people think that's because a lot of folks who had never gotten any access to healthcare, behavioral healthcare for the first time were receiving that. Another thing that's being gutted in this bill is SNAP. Another thing that we've seen is when folks are coming out of jail and prison, access to SNAP reduces the likelihood that folks will be arrested again because they have access to food. They're not forced to do whatever they need to do to survive or help their children survive when they have more access to food. So instead of seeing these things as public safety policies, which they absolutely are, investing in people, giving them housing, giving them food, giving them support to their children, being rich education for their children has been proven over and over and over again to keep communities safe, to reduce violence, to produce thriving communities. What is instead offered to people in this moment through largely like the media and crime hysteria is punishment, more arrests, more police, more prisons. And I just want folks to also be tracking that a big part of this bill is a humongous slush fund that goes towards like ICE kind of enforcement. That's a very, very big pool of money. And I think we should always be concerned about fighting for immigrants on the terms of fighting for immigrants because they're siblings, they are human beings, they are us, they matter. And also, it is important to track the way that that system is intertwined with our domestic criminal legal system. The same private companies that are now going to be getting more money and becoming more powerful for building more immigration detention that detain American citizen Black moms and caretakers. The enforcement of ICE is right now, because the level is so high, is being done largely through these things called 287G agreements, which basically pay and deputize just like police officers to then become ICE enforcers. So through this big pile of money that's going through to like detention and enforcement, we're also getting more money to our prisons. So the private prisons that profit off of predation of Black and immigrant communities, more money to police systems. So it's kind of the full circle of this strategy, which is like we are going to force more people into poverty. We are going to criminalize more poverty. We are going to make people afraid that they're not safe. And then we're going to say the answer to this is aggrandizing and resourcing our criminal legal system and creating just a larger cycle and larger net of us that are going to be subject to that violence and that carcerality, as Professor Bridges calls it.
Thank you, Rena. I really appreciated how you connected, right? Like these systems, these carceral systems, that it's the family policing system, it's the deportation machine, right? It's the criminal legal system, right? All these things are connected, and this veil of right public safety, how that's a falsehood and how it's pushed and leads to more caging. It leads to more separation. I want to get us back a little bit to the conversation that we started with Kiara, right? And then also with Margaret, which you started talking about the Moynihan report, right? And thinking about these things in a historical context. So we know obviously with the criminalization of poverty, there was a lot of backlash in the 1970s to the civil rights movement, a lot of the gains that folks have made, especially Black folks, and gaining access to public assistance, and how then it sparked a calculated propaganda campaign aimed at convincing the public that Black people were undeserving of support. And more centrally, too, this campaign and like revival of slavery era myths, including the deeply racist lie that Black mothers don't love their children, and that they had babies only to collect welfare checks, right? This origin of the welfare queen stereotype. And so what are like the impacts of that lie, right? Like we've already started to talk about that a little bit, right? And like seeing how those lies and those narratives show up today, but just wondering if maybe we can start off with you, Kiara, a little bit about like that pathologizing of Black motherhood and how we've seen that throughout history.
Yeah, thank you. There is, we have it's, how do I start this thought off? It's like an American um, narrative that's been with this country since the dawn of the nation, about Black mothers as pathological figures. Um, and it does work, right? To pathologize Black motherhood does work. That's the reason that the discourse, the narrative exists. That's the reason why it persists, because it legitimizes all sorts of injustices. And so Margaret's already mentioned the Moynihan report, and I'll let her sort of focus on the figure of the matriarch, this dominant Black woman who is essentially, sorry, dominant Black mother who is essentially ruining the Black community. But that figure of the Black matriarch was not the first sort of appearance of pathologized Black motherhood in, the U.S. We can trace it all the way back to chattel slavery, and this figure of the mammy, which white supremacists love so much. This woman, this mother, right, who had children of her own, but her charge was to care for the enslavers' children, and she did a fabulous job. Like she loved those white children so much. She loved those white children so much that she neglected her own children, right? And so like, I would say like that is probably the first sort of appearance of pathologized Black motherhood. This woman, this mother who was deficient in as much as she was unable to love her children. She neglected her children because her love of her white charges was so great. So that's chattel slavery. The Moynihan report came along in the 1960s, 1970s, this response to the civil rights movement, where Daniel Patrick Moynihan sort of identified the cause of poverty and the cause of sort of the sort of violence and crime that one should expect in communities that have not been invested in. Instead of identifying the causes of that sort of social dislocation, in racism, in the failure to invest in those communities, instead, Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, actually, that's Black mothers. These dominant Black women who just run men out of the house, pathologized, right? Pathologizing Black motherhood. After the Moynihan report, here comes Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, saying, I got a new pathologized Black mother for you guys. It's the welfare queen. This woman she just has kids, has all these kids, not because she loves children, not because She sees children as an opportunity to sort of give a life to a child, a life that she didn't have, an opportunity to love unconditionally and to be loved unconditionally. Instead of that, the Reagan said, Black women out here having kids just so that they can get a check from the government, so that they can live large off of governmental largesse, right? Again, from time immemorial, from the dawn of the nation, we have these sort of figures of pathologized Black motherhood, um, these figures that do work to legitimize um, unjust policies and unjust environments, unjust social structures. And I just want to throw out this last idea only because I am working on my fourth book is titled Expecting Inequity. And in that book, it's sort of a close examination of the Black maternal health crisis and racial disparities in maternal mortality and morbidity. And I would like to attribute this idea to this brilliant anthropologist, Dr. Holly Ashe Cole, who invites us to think about all the attention that has been paid to racial disparities in maternal mortality and the Black maternal health crisis in light of this long history of pathologizing Black mothers. Right. So, like in some senses, we have sort of rejoiced about the attention that has been paid of late to Black maternal health, only because Black women have been not dying avoidable, preventable deaths during pregnancy since, again, the dawn of the nation. And so now we're starting to pay attention to it a little bit. We sort of starting to construct it as a social problem. But we ought to be careful, or we ought to be worried in a country that has naturalized pathological Black motherhood, how this figure of the Black woman who can't survive pregnancy, again, not because of a healthcare system that fails her, and not because of society that's just anti-Black and dangerous, and not because of just the failure to care for pregnant folks just generally in the country, but rather we ought to be curious about how that figure might do the same work that Mammy did, that the Black matriarch did, that the welfare queen does, to say that there is something wrong with Black mothers. And in this instantiation, the fault of Black mothers leads her to die, right, on the path of giving birth. So again, I think that I think Margaret's remarks were just so inspirational to me because they sort of got me excited about thinking about ways to respond to the lies, right? Like the framing of any sort of little acknowledgement as charity, right? I think that we have to resist the framings that powerful people offer us and offer our own reframings in our resistance. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kiara. I really appreciate you clearly laying that historical framework that I think we've all been doing, in the course of this conversation, right? It's clear that systems lay the ills of capitalism at the feet of Black mamas. And this scapegoating and stigma persists today in the modern family policing system. And so I want to invite Zara and Imani into this conversation, and just really thinking about the ways that we see these narratives, right, about mamas, but also these narratives about receiving support and care, and how that shows up too in the work that y'all are doing to undo those lies, right, to build authentic community.
I can go. Hi, everyone. I'm Imani. So at Black Families Loving Unite, or Blue, we offer holistic advocacy intensives. And one of the trainings that we offer through this is called Systemic Oppression. The advocacy intensives are designed for anyone who works with families or parents who are navigating child welfare. So in this particular training that I'm talking about, we break down the four types of oppression, and one of the most important, they're all important, but one of the most important to understand is ideological oppression. So ideological oppression is dominant narratives, othering, phrases like those Mexicans or those Blacks. Ideological oppression, it always starts with a lie. a lie that says one group of people is more deserving of power, resources, and humanity than another. It paints one group as smarter, better parents, more capable, while branding another group as lazy, dangerous, or unfit. And when it comes to families who are navigating or who have been involved with the family policing systems, these lies are everywhere. We hear their homes are unsafe, like using poverty related conditions like overcrowding or peeling paint. If you live in the Bronx, God, you live anywhere in New York City, okay? Peeling paint just to justify removal instead of addressing housing inequality. They can't afford their kids, they shouldn't have them. Like framing poverty as a moral failure instead of providing resources. We hear they're violent because they hit their kids, ignoring the impact of generational trauma and poverty stress, and, pathologizing cultural discipline practices. But also, as it comes to stereotypes, I can talk about me as an impacted parent. This was a lie that was told about me specifically, that I was a violent parent. My son was 6 months when he was in care, and there was an accident. My husband and I would never do anything to harm our child. He wound up having like a broken tibia and fibula. They have these child safety conferences that basically say that you're guilty before they already know what they're gonna do before they come to any agreement, but they frame it in such a way of like, let's come up with an action plan. So during my child safety conference, I remember them bringing up an unfounded case from 10 years ago. Because in New York, it stays on your record. If you have an investigation, whether it's founded or unfounded, it stays on your record for, I think, 11 years. When in my case, I was 30. When I was 23, my sister, who is 10 years younger than me, our mom had multiple sclerosis. She was sick, and my sister was wilding out. If you're an older sister, you know. If you know, you know. And I beat her because she was wilding out and stressing my sick mother out. And of course, she went to a counselor. She told her counselor, was a white woman who was like, I'm going to save you from that evil household. And I had an investigation. They bought that again. They used that against me during the child safety conference to paint me as like this violent woman who took her anger out on her 6 month old child. That's the impact of where it, like, ideological oppression leads to institutional oppression, which is what I've been hearing you all talk about now, right? The impact is family separation. The impact is continuing generational trauma.
Thank you, Imani. Appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story, Imani. Something I've been thinking about, listening to you talk about ideological oppression and listening to all of you talk about like this idea of the welfare queen, these ideas put forward by the Moynihan Report, is just the fact that like there's a lot of pressure to live up to this nuclear form of family that, you know, many of our Black and Indigenous ancestors, people of communities of color historically have not structured our families that way in the first place. We have had networks of kinship, networks of care. And so already, I think even just this idea as the standard, like automatically makes us less safe, because isolating families into the nuclear form, it's a patriarchal invention, it's a capitalist invention, and it's a space where child sexual abuse actually really thrives. What kids need are whole communities that are responsible for caring for them. It takes a village. We know that, and our ancestors have known that. And I think the stigma especially impacts folks who refuse to conform. So single mothers, Black single mothers, sex workers, those of us leading what Saidiya Hartman would call wayward lives, just this refusal to participate um, in a in a structure that we know is harmful for us. But then also, I would say, even within our alternative networks of care, like none of us are immune to the ways that systems of domination, systems of repression infiltrate our lives, infiltrate our beliefs and our behaviors. And so I think we have to be honest with ourselves about that and about just being willing to constantly interrogate how it shows up within us. And, you know, asking ourselves, How am I upholding patriarchy? How am I upholding anti-Blackness? What are the ways that I am upholding and promoting capitalist ideas of urgency and productivity, and be willing to address systems of oppression in our close relationships, in our collectives. Um, and, I don't think that that means like discarding of people who don't have all the right language. I think that's really I think it's really hard for a lot of communities to hold accountability with care. So I think we need to skill up. We need to continuously engage in political education. We need to continuously engage in unlearning and healing work so that we don't replicate the systems that we've been indoctrinated into.
Thank you, Zara. And I think a lot of like what both you and Imani have shared and what I'm hoping we can uncover and unpack a little bit here too is like the work that we do is situated in this long arc of Black liberation, the Black freedom struggle, right? And so I would love for maybe we can start with um, Margaret or Zara, Imani, Arena, anyone can chime in, but would just love to hear a little bit more about the work that y'all are seeing and involved in and engaging in, right? Like Imani, the reparations framework, Zara, the Philly Child Care Collective, Margaret, the Guaranteed Income Pilots, right? Rena, a lot of the Bell Funds, right? So seeing all these different ways that folks are pulling up, right? We've always pulled up, right? We've always showed up as a community, as a people, out of necessity, but also out of like genuine love and care for each other, right? And so as we're thinking about one, we can never rely on these governments, right? And in fact, as everybody's showing, that the government is often utilizing any process whereby folks are seeking any level of support, they're met with surveillance, they're met with criminalization, right? And so if we know this about the government, and it's only getting worse, right, with the eroding even further of the social safety net, with all these ways that systems are working together to cause harm, what is it that we're building and building upon, right? And grounding in that, and sharing with the audience of like what is it that we're seeing works, that we know works, and that folks are doing. Maybe we'll start with you, Margaret, because I haven't heard your voice in a little bit, of just sharing a lot of the guaranteed income pilots, or what you said, like this is direct cash, right? Let's call it what it is, right? If you want to share a little bit more about that work to get money directly in the hands of folks who need it the most.
Sure, I'd love to do that, and also the framework, the historic context, so to speak. I was glad to because it is connected to the direct cash that we're demanding right now. Before at the time when in history when allegedly slavery, importing slaves was illegal in the United States, Black women, we were the breeders. We were creating the next generation of slaves, right? And encouraged to do that. And of course, the men, played their role as well. So as long as we were producing children to work for them, or we were caring, as the sister mentioned earlier, for other people's children, that's okay. But when it comes to caring for our own children, then that becomes problematic. And particularly becomes problematic if our children are seen to be rebellious, are not seen to be following, the path that Moynihan and other social scientists would want them to be in. So I think it's important to mention that as well. And also the business about the the danger of being a Black woman and pregnant in the United States, and also knowing that even among quote unquote, middle class Black women, the birth weight of our babies are still below, right? So what is all that about? It means that all of that stuff from the breeders of slavery or from fighting Jim Crow, the whole thing, that is in us. We are carrying that, okay? We're literally carrying our ancestors as they are carrying us. And that plays a role I think, and I think more information is coming out on that, on what is happening in addition to the racism in today in the medical industry. So I think that going back, and you want a practical example then of direct cash, there are a few things that are happening right now. One, that Congresswoman Gwen Moore out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there are two pieces of legislation she has, and I'll have to say about her, because she was not only a mother on welfare, but her children were taken from her because she was accused of welfare fraud because she was getting student aid on top of welfare. Okay, she's now a member of Congress and she is there, she says, get on the House Ways and Means Committee, which we helped her to do, and to really fight on these issues. So she has a bill that's related to poverty not being neglect, and she also has a bill that modernizes the earned income child tax credit. So when we talk about direct cash, I think we're looking at the guaranteed, like our program that I was involved in, the guaranteed care income. But I think we're also looking at the modernization of EITC in the ways that Gwen Moore spoke about. You know, the bill that she's carrying, and I hope that you will look that up and offer some support for that, because in that bill, she says that students should be included in EITC, and that family caregivers, unpaid family caregivers, also should be included. But the pilot that I know you're referring to, I should say that we finished up a small pilot in San Francisco. It was a pilot of the In Defense of Prostitute Women's Safety Project. In the global women's strike, there are a number of autonomous organizations, Black Women for Wages for Housework being one, Women of Color being one, U.S. Prostitutes Collective, Queer Strike, etc., with visible people with visible and invisible disabilities. So it's sectors of people speaking in their own names, spelling out the specifics of the oppression as they experience it. So in the Bay Area, it was no accident then that it was the In Defense of Prostitute Women's Safety that initiated and in a lot of ways carried a small pilot. And the focus of the pilot was for single mothers, impoverished single mothers who were at risk of losing their children to child welfare and who were at risk of criminalization. And the pilot has now finished. It was $2,000. It was more than a lot of the guaranteed programs across it. It was $2,000 per month, okay? And I don't want to give all away because the report will be issued formally in September. We're doing, a press conference and a whole splash about it. But I can share with you, because the pilot is now finished, right? So where, the reports being written up, etc. One of a key finding for this particular group, talking about child welfare, is that the incidence of interaction with child welfare went down for the women who were in the pilot. That tells us something. Some of the women, also, we don't want to use names and identify women, so I'll just broadly use criminalization, right? Who felt that they didn't have to be back out on the street. You know what I'm saying? Because that funding and that money was there. So there's no question about it, despite the fact that there is now a backlash against direct cash of people saying a report came out a few weeks ago from some right wingers who were saying, well, it really doesn't make any difference, right? It didn't show, any difference with the children. Well, first of all, they used a very small sample and they were giving people something like $333 a month. I mean, come on now. For those of us living in urban areas, much less rural areas. So what we suspected and what a lot of us know and has been shown with other guaranteed income programs of pilots across the country is that getting that direct cash makes a huge difference with the quality of time you have with your children, helping just with, basic needs, right? But one difference, I should say, with the pilot that we did, and Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike, my organization, we were partners in that pilot, right? One difference is that it's the first guaranteed care income pilot that we know about. So we looked at caregiving. We looked at how that impacted, being part of that pilot and getting that $2,000 a month, the difference that that made in the mother's stress level. Okay. I was a single mother for a long time. And let me tell you, it is stressful. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Trying to get that little, when you're pregnant, the little bit from WIC, the orange juice and cheese and whatnot that I used to get. And now they're, cutting back on all of that. So it made a tremendous difference. And I think when the pilot, the report comes out, it will definitely show the impact on the children, the impact on the mothers, the ability to be able to have more time with the children, to be able to do more of that caring work that they were not able to do. Because, when you're out in the factory all day, okay, and you're out living, living what they call domestic, what I'm saying, and you're leaving your children, behind, you have very little, you come home and you're absolutely exhausted. You're exhausted from that because everything has been drained out of you. And what little you have left then goes to the children, goes to the elders that you're trying to take care of, other family members. So, we're going to look forward to getting the word out about the results of that pilot, but I think it will show what we have seen with guaranteed income pilots across the country, but specifically the importance of the impact of something like a guaranteed care income, right? And poverty not being neglect. California, Jasmine, you may know about the Kamliger, who's now in Congress, the bill that a lot of us were involved in fighting for, a fight that was led by formerly incarcerated women, by the way, so that poverty cannot be construed, is not supposed to be construed with neglect in California. And we're, hoping that that's also going to spread across the country.
Thank you, Margaret, and sharing that. I think, what you made clear is that putting money in the hands of caregivers, right, has an impact beyond the dollars and cents, right? So of course you're keeping folks fed, you're keeping folks housed, but also that safety, that like health impacts on people's stress level and the ability to really have quality time with your family. I think that's invaluable aspects of what happens when we're actually directing these funds to the communities who need them most. I just want to say, a lot of this is why MFP launched our Thrive Fund in February of this year. So we launched the first mutual aid and capacity fund for our movement ecosystem. And the real thinking behind that, and it was really, it's a love offering that came from our community. They were like, we're missing these opportunities for folks to get emergency resources when they need them most, in ways that are going to keep folks from being under the guise of the family policing system. And so through the Thrive Fund, we're able to move resources in the hands of folks. And we've seen just how that impact, not only on the dollars going out, and over the last 5 months, we've been able to move $70,000, right? And so that's significant and that's meaningful, but also people telling us, like, I feel heard, I feel seen, I feel supported, I don't feel alone. Those are the intangibles that result from us as community being able to show up for our people in real ways. That isn't just, the charity or the other kind of things that they try and claim that this work is. Right now, this is real community investment. This is how communities show up, and it has those impacts well beyond the dollars and cents of it, well beyond the light bill and the housing, which those are necessary, right? But also, how are we making people feel connected to each other and how are we building those relationships. So Zara, Imani, Irina, if either of y'all want to jump in about um, any of that.
So at Blue, our mission is simple and unapologetic. We are here to reimagine and create alternatives to the child welfare system. Alternatives rooted in care, dignity, and community, not surveillance or punishment. We believe families deserve support, not suspicion, care, not control, protection, not policing. And we do this through political education, so telling the truth about the harms of the child welfare system and uplifting paths to repair, organizing, putting impacted families at the center of policy fights, and community care and support. We create healing spaces because liberation is about restoring wholeness, not just changing laws. Jasmine, you mentioned earlier our reparations work. We are currently working on building a reparations framework, or what a reparations framework around family policing. When we talk about reparations, some people ask, why should we start with Black and Indigenous families? Like, why reparations for child welfare? Why Black? That's like the big question. Why Black? Because other races get involved and impacted by child welfare too. I'm going to focus on answering this question so that the audience will sign up for Blue's newsletter to know when we will be having our next virtual reparations teaching. Wink, wink, hint, hint. But to answer the question, like why reparations for Black and Brown families, because no other communities have endured continuous government enforced family destruction for centuries. It was mentioned earlier about like slavery auctions and to indigenous boarding schools, to the foster care pipeline. The message has always been the same. Our families are disposable. And this is not just about inequality, it's about state sanctioned harm. And history tells us when harm is targeted, repair must be targeted too. Reparations are not charity. They are a debt that is owed, and family reparations cannot wait. This is not only about repairing the past, it's about stopping the harm from happening right now. Every day people are being pulled out of their homes in these ICE raids, snatched off the street, locked in cages, separated from their children with no guarantee that they'll ever see them again. And let's tell the truth. The same power that allows ICE to disappear immigrant families is the same power that has disappeared Black families for generations through the child welfare system. The same logic fuels both, deciding whose families are worthy of protection and whose can be destroyed. If we do not set the precedent now that the government must repair the harm done to Black families, this violence will continue. Reparations for Black families are not only about redress, they are about prevention. And when we win reparations here, we set the legal and political blueprint to end all forms of state-sanctioned family separation.
Yes, say that, period. Mic drop, all of the things, Imani. That was fire. And Zara, Rena.
I mean, I don't, again, I'm really not rolling the dice well with how and when I'm speaking and who I'm speaking after. But I just
Okay.
want to add to that, like, two things. One, about the kind of slavery, the legacy of slavery in this country and our carcerality and our forms of punishment. And Jasmine, you had originally asked about like some of the experiments that we've seen. And I was just going to talk a little bit about kind of like bail funds and the Black Mamas Bailout and the National Bailout Collective, which comes deeply from this legacy of Black people being like, we will figure it out. We will buy each other's freedom. And that looked like buying a body out of slavery, and it looks like buying a body out of a cage today. And when Margaret said this thing that really touched me about universal basic income, meaning that people get to spend like quality time with their children in a certain way, it really made me think a lot about our criminal legal system and this idea that like you're fighting for your child's survival. And like what more would you ask from a mama or a caretaker to do everything possible to free your child from a cage, whether that's mortgaging your house, working 15 jobs. I'm not going to speak for any other moms. For me, if I have to do it, beg, borrow, steal, whatever I need to do to get my kid out of the cage. But how little that leaves for your kid beyond just their survival, and how little that leaves for you or your other kids or your communities. And I think what bail funds are often kind of the way people understand them, which is very important, which is like, oh, this is a thing that we do that we as a community can work together, pool resources, buy each other's freedom. But one way that they're extraordinarily important that is not always talked about is what it actually is doing is forcing or helping other people to help shoulder the burden that Black mamas have done by themselves. It's been like, I have this one piece of property in my family from 6 generations, and I'm going to mortgage it to pay the bail bondsman to get my kid or my loved one out. I have this nest egg for my retirement or for my kids' college or my rainy day fund if I lose my job. I'm going to give that up. I'm going to push myself alone further into precarity to be a good parent, to be a good caretaker, because to Amani's point, that's the stakes that Black moms are under. It's a lot of times it's not just like a healthy, balanced lunch and getting your exposure to, I don't know, screen time in a way that you're comfortable with. It's like my child is in a cage and I have to do everything I can to get them out. So I just think that this idea of like community care and what experiments kind of we lean into and use to kind of push past this, not this country. I mean, we want to talk a lot about this regime, which we should, but like this regime is based on a larger strategy and logic and viewpoint that is very integral to this country. And we've seen reform itself over across Democrats and Republicans across different decades. Bail funds, I do think, are an important one, both because they're just talking about creative ways to get people free, but really they're talking about like there's been a group of Black people who have always been very committed to getting ourselves and each other free. How do we support that group of people? How do we shoulder that burden together rather than letting it fall disproportionately on Black moms? In 20, I think it was 2015, 10 years ago, the Ella Baker Center did this incredible report called Who Pays, which started to popularize this idea that like the people who pay for the criminal legal system are oftentimes Black caretakers who are not themselves within the system, but are very much paying for it financially and other ways. And that found that when bail was paid for folks, 65% of the time, it was paid by a family member, and 90% of those family members were women. So this is something that this is like an extractive thing from Black women, from Black communities, and this is a way to repair it. But the last thing I just want to say is like, also with those incredible experiments that free people come increased surveillance, increased criminalization. Professor Bridges talked a lot about the way that we are criminalizing certain communities. And that's what crime is, just to keep it a buck. Like, crime is not about conduct, it's about communities, which is why two upper middle class Black siblings get in a fight. It's called kids being kids. But with what Imani shared, it's something that is the criminal legal system is involved. It impacts her ability to parent her kids. That's why we say crime is a social construct and not really about kind of conduct. Um, but I think though we also have to be very diligent that those efforts of community care are also going to be hyper criminalized and are already being hyper criminalized. We saw in Atlanta the folks that were doing some of the work around like raising money for bail funds and legal support for the protesters were targeted with a raid at 5 a.m. There was a RICO raid on their house. They were detained. They're still facing federal charges. I think that more and more of our experiments, more and more of our bringing our kind of ancestral knowledge to the present to kind of outsmart white supremacy and free our people is going to be like hyper surveilled and hyper criminalized. And that's why I just appreciate spaces like this where we're constantly talking about the family policing system and all types of liberation movements in the context of abolition, because we're not going to be able to successfully free ourselves when we live in a hyper police state, a hyper carceral state, a hyper surveillance state, where those efforts that get us free are the very things that are those are the very people that are first targeted for criminalization.
Thank you, Rena. All of that, I think it's important that we're thinking about like that criminalization of support and care networks, because unfortunately, also, this isn't about us just pulling up, but we also have to think about how the system won't let us pull up without consequence. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of talk a little bit about that, Zara, as you talk about the Philly Child Care Collective, of like some of the ways in which you've seen the system start to police and the barriers that are then created when trying to do this kind of work.
Oh, absolutely. I so appreciate you bringing in the barriers, Rena, because yeah, like community care has been criminalized. I mean, even like I was saying before, like nuclear families, if you don't live your life up to that nuclear family norm, you are more likely to be targeted, criminalized, and policed. I think sex workers are a great example of this. In New York, for example, you could be charged with trafficking because the anti-trafficking laws are very broad for being a third party in engaged with a sex worker in any way. And that third party could mean so many things. It could mean driving a sex worker to a date. It could mean housing a sex worker or being the roommate of a sex worker. So community care has consistently been criminalized. I also appreciated Rena you talking about like who bears the brunt. And it's so often it's Black moms. And so there's like a real need for solidarity and for spreading the load because I think this is one of the big things that comes up in in groups I've been a part of, in collectives I've been a part of, it's just burnout. People get burnt out because it's always the same people taking the most responsibility. And then those of us who take the most responsibility are always also first in line to be blamed when things go wrong, right? And so it's like there's not a shared that we just need more people. We just need more people in the fight. I'll put it that way. But Philly Child Care Collective, what we do is it's a pretty basic providing childcare for meetings, actions, events. It's meeting the material need for childcare. And then also I so appreciate that a lot of the experiments y'all talked about are about giving money directly to parents. And that's something that we've been doing the last couple of years. So we've always provided free childcare to folks, and it's been volunteer led for about 20 years. But in the last couple of years, we're providing childcare on a sliding scale. So if it's a neighborhood coalition, like the Brewerytown neighborhood coalition, we're providing childcare for free. If it's a larger organization that can provide some kind of donation, then we can, offer us on a sliding scale so that we can also pay people sliding scale to provide childcare. And that enables single parents to be part of the collective because so often it's us who's already doing the care labor, so why don't we value that work and pay that work, pay for that work. So yeah, just reiterating the theme of give money to Black moms.
Let me jump in here with the money bit, giving money. I just want to mention very briefly, there is a program in California. It started in the Bay Area, the Abundant Birth Program, where you just give money to pregnant Black people, no strings attached, $1,000 a month for an entire year. This was in response to the higher rates of maternal mortality and morbidity amongst Black and Pacific Islander communities. Guess what happens when you give $1,000 no strings attached grants to Black people? Improved birth outcome. There was decreases in low birth weight babies, increases in maternal mental health, physical health, just all across the board. Give money to Black people. That is the solution. That is the charge.
Yeah, can I jump in there on that? Thank you so much, all of you, because I didn't mention the child tax credit. And our network, we've done a lot of work on the child tax credit, which was the what we call the gold standard, which is there were no mandated work requirements. It was being paid monthly, right, as opposed to the end of the year. And it greatly reduced child poverty. Was one of the most successful programs reducing child poverty in the country, as far as we know. So, of course, what happened? They ended it, right? And now have put in, um, somewhat of a child tax credit, but work requirements and all of that are still back. So, paying attention to a child tax credit in addition to the earned EITC and other ways of getting direct cash, I think are also important. But I also want to say in terms of, as we have always had to help each other to survive. Ain't that right? From back from the slave days through Jim Crow, whatever, we had to, in a lot of ways, really depend on each other. My cousin, Martha Prescott, who was in SNCC and down in Mississippi, down south during that time where people were losing their lives, etc., and Black families were putting them up. And somebody sat in those, what they call the shotgun houses, where there's a hallway goes straight through, would sit on the porch all night long with a rifle, okay? Because they knew that they had SNCC workers, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee workers in their house. The Black Panther Party, one of the most successful things they did was not only the work they did around sickle cell, but the free breakfast program. All righty. In the village that I grew up in, we had to take care of each other because when one person ran out of food, you go across the street and you get food from somebody else. So that's what we have always had to do, and that's what we do ourselves as a movement in terms of taking care of each other. So I don't think that is exclusive, though, of demanding the resources that has been stolen from us. It all belongs to us. When we don't fight for the money, we don't fight for the resources, you know who pays the price? Not only impoverished people in the United States, but look at Gaza. Look at what's happening to Palestinian people. Look at what's happening in Haiti. So when we allow them to get away with our money, they're using it to kill Black and brown people in this country and all over the damn world. And we have a responsibility for that, I think, in terms of moving forward. So I am all for the funds. I know in some of the small villages, you had something where somebody would put in a certain amount of money, and then at the end of the month, somebody would get the whole cash. I can't remember the name of what it's called now. But all of those were kind of mutual aid programs, and they were not exclusive of demanding what is rightfully ours from the state as well. One other thing I wanted to mention too in relation to immigration is that a lot of immigrants, they're sending money back home. They're supporting families back home, not only the families who are here. So what is this regime doing? They're now going to be taxing money that immigrants are sending back home. That's how we survived. My grandmother working as a maid in New York City, sending back the little barrel to my little village in Barbados, once a year with some little clothes that she made, the ham for Christmas that usually turned up spoiled because it took so long coming over on the boat. You know what I'm saying? So that is also a form of mutual aid, a form of taking the wealth here and getting it somewhere else. So, all of that I think has to be considered, and one isn't mutually exclusive. I'm really glad to hear so many people on this call talking about the importance of direct cash, of people also talking about reparatory justice. Talk about reparatory justice. We're involved with trying to get some money back for Haiti that had to pay France for the loss of their slave labor, right? And for the cost of the Haitian Revolution. So this thing is broad and deep. And our starting point here is child welfare, but you can see the threads and the connections everywhere else. Finally, I just want to say, too, we're part of Support Not Separation, which is a global network in the UK where every first Wednesday, they're outside their equivalent of children's court, have been there for months. In Scotland, in Wales, in other parts of the world, that where they're fighting similar things to what we're doing. So I think it's important also, and I was glad that in the last, we do monthly meetings for Support Not Separation. There's a blog that people could go on. Amanda Wallace, I always want to lift up Amanda Wallace, who's just doing amazing work. We like to support her as much as we can. She came onto the meeting of the Global Support Not Separation meeting. So I think that building our movements locally in our communities, nationally in our communities, but understanding the international repercussions from um, the international repercussions on how we organize the demands that we make and the impact that it has not only on people in this country, but internationally, on child welfare, but on poverty generally.
Thank you, Margaret. That was like a master class in breaking this all down and connecting and weaving all of it. Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize that this isn't just isolated here in the US, but how, this government is exporting these controlling narratives, and really how our taxpayer dollars, like in our names, are being used to starve, to kill, to harm everyone, and our siblings, in other countries, including in Palestine, and so many other places. And so I really appreciate, like, thinking about like this internationalism, right? And this year, another one of our close movement comrades, Ashley Albert, founded Stolen Children's Month as a way for us to think about this, not only in the family policing context, right, but think about how many of our children are being taken and stolen, no matter what system it is, right, and how that's a global phenomenon, and how we're connecting and being able to shift those narratives and really talking about this. I think, Imani, you brought into this space like the word disappearing, right? Like how often, right? And we're seeing throughout history this disappearing of people, this disappearing of children, of adults, children, and families, whether it's into cages, whether it's into the family policing system, whatever it might be, deportation systems, right? Our families are being disappeared in the work that we're doing to make visible that harm, and to also make visible and repair those connections with ourselves, so that we're able to show up in the ways that we need to continue this fight. Because as so many people noted here, we don't just get to show up and be let alone, right? The system is finding ways and has always found ways to criminalize that survival, to criminalize efforts of folks to thrive, right? You see it at Tulsa, right? You see all these things of ways that Black folks have always tried and have always wrapped ourselves around each other, and still met with so much violence and so much resistance. And then also to your point, Margaret, that doesn't mean that the government gets to abdicate any responsibility for what we're owed. In addition to us creating those collective care models, it's also ensuring that our taxpayer dollars aren't going off to kill, and that our taxpayer dollars aren't surveilling our folks either. And instead that they're able to show up and be utilized in ways that truly keep families safe and together. So this obviously, and I want to make sure that folks end up getting a last word. And I know we said we were going to do a Q&A, but we didn't have any questions in the live Q&A. So I think everybody was just resonating and flowing and going. And this conversation was just so beautiful and powerful. And I'm definitely going to be revisiting this recording, and super thankful that we're recording it. But I wanted to take a moment to connect the threads of like what we've been seeing, right, throughout this Breaking Silos series. Um, this started off in November of last year. We had a symposium. It was awesome, and starting to really have these conversations of not seeing enough in the reproductive justice space. This viewing of abolition as an imperative, of the family policing system as imperative, to that reproductive justice movement, right? To the work that we're doing. And oftentimes folks not seeing the work that they might be doing to ensure that like Black folks, Black mamas aren't dying, caregivers aren't dying in childbirth, right? To ensuring that folks have access to abortion care, right? Like all of those things, folks weren't necessarily seeing the work around family policing as part and parcel to that broader reproductive justice movement. And so with this series, that was our hope and our dream, to broaden this and really recognize and honoring what reproductive justice truly is, which is all of this, right? It's about bodily autonomy. It's about making sure that our people are safe and well, and combating any system that tries to turn against us, and any system that is made to rip us apart. And so throughout this series, we had a ton of different panels, and I just want to share take a few moments to reflect on the ground that we've covered and the lessons we've built together. So in April, that was our first panel, and we laid the foundation naming family policing abolition as a reproductive justice imperative and interrogating what that means for our movements. In May, we turned to the criminalization of birthing people who use drugs. So making it clear that our organizing must center them, especially now as reproductive rights come under attack at every turn. In June for Pride Month, it brought us into conversation with youth and queer folks impacted by the family policing system who spoke about intergenerational harms and the vision for a future that's rooted in bodily autonomy. And this conversation was super critical, right? As we think about the right, not the real right, right? Like not right, but the conservative right, right? The far right escalates these attacks on queer and trans youth under the guise of child protection. In July, we exposed the deportation machine as a central pillar of the carceral state, inseparable from family policing and family separation. And we named how the scapegoating of Black and immigrant families remains a core tactic of the fascist playbook. And today, we just had a powerful conversation looking at anti-poverty movements, exploring how community-based experiments are essential and world-building practices to keep our families restored, protected, and free. And when we use the term experiments, right, it's not necessarily fancy. And I know Zara, at one point you said Philly chocolate, like is basic in what you do, right? And it's like, it's not basic, right? It's inherent, right? It's what our folks have always done, and it comes second nature and should feel second nature, and how we're able to move with each other and start to develop those real tangible ways that we're showing up for our people in real time. And so, and through all of these different sessions, we've been able to break silos, and certain truths kept surfacing again and again, right? And nearly every session, we return to this core truth that we have to reject the harmful tactic of dividing people into deserving and undeserving, good versus bad immigrants, good versus bad parents, legal versus illegal drug use, right? And how these hierarchies serve no purpose at all, instead of legitimizing the carceral state. We made it clear time and time again that criminalizing parents does not make their children safer. And if we truly want to protect children, we have to take care of their parents. And that includes direct cash assistance, right? And our analysis also, it reaffirmed that our struggles against family policing, the drug war, pregnancy criminalization, the criminalization of queer youth, the deportation machine, and war and genocide here and abroad are completely inseparable, right? If our oppressors are working this closely together, we must do the same in our resistance. And we must break down these silos across the reproductive justice movement and other movements for justice, other movements in our broader vision and struggle, our Black freedom struggle, right? We need to be moving in lockstep. Because yeah, when they got the devil on the side, somehow they seem to be a little bit more organized, right? And if we're being out organized by that, then we need to be doing more to organize ourselves. And then, it also just reaffirmed to us and reminded us again and again that abolition is not only about dismantling, it is about building. And our work is to create and nurture our relationships with each other and exploring familiar and new ways of caring that gets us closer and closer to freedom. And that everyday acts of love and solidarity are the foundations for this work. And we can scale that, right? And it exists in our families, it exists in our communities, and has existed in our movements, and will continue to be doing that work. And so with wrapping up the series, we invite you to please stay connected. You'll find all of the sessions